Yeah.
or where you were during January 6th,
January 6th,
or
yeah.
you name it. All of these things form who we are as people, whether we are physically present or not. What is
Yeah.
significant is that now you can see and relive. Let me just add,
Yeah.
those of you who listen to me on the radio know I have a sound archive of more than 8,000 sounds. They're all on CD.
Right.
My former producer, the late Roger Dorfman,
Right.
produced them for me. And one of the great things I was able to do on the air was to relive moments in history. And actually, a former KGO producer who you may know, Alan Ray, who worked for a variety of stations, called me because he did an award-winning recording on the Kennedy assassination. Absolutely stunning, and now lost because nobody seems to have a copy of it. But those are the kinds of things that you want to recapture and have and remain fixed in our memories.
Yeah, and the continuity of history and the continuity of a stable government is so essential, and that's why LBJ did what he did, because he wanted to make sure to maintain that continuity of power, and it goes to the continuity of our memories and our ceremonies, of which, for me and you and many millions of others, Thanksgiving is one. So we seek that as human beings, and LBJ understood those symbols of power and how important they were. So I think we gravitate towards them, and one of the reasons that January 6th was such a shocking and horrific event to me was because it impacted upon that democratic passage of power. It attempted to interfere with the safe continuity of power that LBJ in that instance was trying to preserve. And I remember growing up with a little booklet that I think they give away or sell at the Capitol itself. But long before I'd ever gone to the Capitol, I had a We the People book about the U.S. Capitol.
I remember it well.
Yeah, that shows the different chambers and shows who was majority leader at the time, and many historic pictures and things like that. And I had inculcated into myself a great sense of reverence for and the history of the Capitol and of the legislative process, and to see that disrupted and desecrated and defiled on January 6th was just like a horrific slap in the face to me, and I just had an instinctive sense of rage when I saw that play out.
Every American.
Yeah,
by the way,
I
would be remiss if I didn't mention the passing of Rosalind Carter.
Yes,
and who was a very significant first lady on so many levels, and whose work after they left the White House was so great. One of the treasured possessions which I have is the White House Guide, which was published when Jackie Kennedy was first lady.
Yes,
but I have it signed by 7 first ladies and 3 presidents.
Oh,
and
wow.
on one page, it is signed by Jimmy and Rosalind Carter.
Oh,
and, to me, it is something of great historic value, something that is very significant. And although Carter's been out of office now for more than 50 years, it's hard to believe. It's something we need to remember.
It is something we need to remember. And
I said more than 50 years, almost
40.
50 years.
Right. Yeah. More than 40 years. But an amazing. I mean, they had a longer marriage, having been married. I
77 years.
Amazing. Longer than most first ladies have lived. Longer than most presidents have lived. It's
I have a few years
amazing.
to go before I reach their record of 77 years. And I assume you do too.
As do I. Let's see. Oh my gosh! I got some planning to do. I'm coming up on 25 myself.
I was going to say, be very careful. You don't want to forget these important, significant dates, particularly if your wife is listening.
She may well be after this. It's so interesting. Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter, 77 years. My parents just celebrated their 51st. I'm coming up on my 25th. It puts you in a sense of
they've been married
history.
51 years.
They have been married.
And you're
51
so
years.
young.
Well,
really?
they started young and I started young. So
I got
you. Us country folk, we start real early, like.
And now as they would say, the rest of the story.
The rest of the story. I must ask, because I am too young to have gone through it or have made a memory of it myself. What do you remember about the day Kennedy was assassinated and the days that followed? Where were you, and what did you experience at that time?
I was at Roosevelt Junior High School in San Francisco. I was sitting in the cafeteria, and the janitor of the school, who was a good friend of mine, Mac, came in and he said, the president's been shot. And I couldn't believe it. But I walked out in the hall, and there was Mr. Rippey, who was our typing teacher. They had typing classes in those days, with tears streaming down his face, staggering. And we all understood what had happened. My close friend to this day, Terry Redmond, was student body president of our middle school.
Wow.
And he presided at the assembly. And by the way, I had him come back on the 75th anniversary of Roosevelt Junior High School, middle school now, and had him tell the story. And he read Walt Whitman's poem, and it was a very powerful.
Oh, Captain, my Captain. Right.
I then went, and I've never forgotten this. First of all, it's the only date I ever got an A on a French test. My French teacher was so distraught, Mrs. Altman of blessed memory. And then I went to the dentist. And from my dentist's office, we had a view of all of the tall buildings of San Francisco. And you know what struck me? All the flags at half staff.
Wow.
We must have been able to see 10 or 12 flags from that vantage point, all at half staff. And then coming home, turning on the television set and watching intently. And it was such a powerful moment. One, as I say, the only analogy in those days was, where were you when FDR died? I was not alive when Franklin Roosevelt died.
Right.
But there is a book called When FDR Died, which describes the reaction of people. And that's the same with September 11th. When you roll
that's really the only comparable thing of that scale where I think everybody alive now remembers where they were.
And so it's something, I talked about it in my podcast this morning. It's the question of memory, of what we witness. And the title of the podcast this morning is Witness.
Yeah.
Because that's what we've done in our history. And one of the things that strikes me, and the reason I feel so strongly about Donald Trump and what happened on January 6th, is because when you witness something, when you see it and you understand how it tears at the very fabric of society, in my judgment, you have to respond. You have to respond with vigor. And anyway, that's my observation.
Well, and it's amazing, and I remember certainly where I was on September 11th. You know, I strangely turned on the radio, and that's how I found out about it first. I turned on.
My cousin Peter, who passed away some years ago, was living in Dallas, Texas, and he called me. And remember, they're ahead of us in terms of time. And he called me and he said, "John, are you watching television?"
Yeah.
And I said, "No." He said, "You better flip it on. You better watch this."
Yeah.
And it was very difficult. I took my son, Samuel, to school because we didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
I dropped him off at school, and immediately they said, "Well, we're not going to hold school today."
Right.
And I brought Samuel home with a friend and babysat them the whole day, if you will. Yeah. But, it's a curious thing. Memory is something we preserve. And as I was saying earlier, when we sit around our Thanksgiving tables, all of us remember moments in our lives, people who are no longer with us. And one of the most compelling things about radio, the thing that I loved about radio, is that it was the imagination. It was the theater of the mind. I was telling a kid yesterday, they asked me what my favorite nation was, and I responded, the imagination. Because I can go anywhere. I can talk to anybody. I can see. You asked about the death of a president. I have the book here, but it's the interview that I got from Meet the Press, a 1-hour interview that I reread in order to get that sense of the power of words. Yeah. And that's why what you are doing every day with your podcast is so important. And may I say, as I have done before, I regret the fact that talk radio, at least in Northern California, is a dead letter. We don't have it because there's no way for people to interact. There's no way for people to respond. I was on the air On the day of the attack
That's
on
right.
September 11th,
That's right.
Gene Burns, my distinguished late colleague who I adored,
Yeah.
was in Tahiti, and he was on his deathbed, we were told.
Mm.
And I was called to fill in. It was one of the most serious moments to be on the air, the first person on the air live on KGO, and to know that I had 3 hours with no commercials, and the only
Yeah.
thing we were was take news at the top of the hour, to make sure that I spoke in a tempered, reasonable, effective fashion that
Yeah.
afforded people a chance to air what they felt. And our general manager, Mickey Luckoff,
Right.
kissed me on the head afterward. He said that was fantastic because
Yeah.
it meant that I had performed the way I should have. And may I say it in stark contrast, when I listen to some talk radio and to some television broadcasts today, particularly on the right, and let me name names, but I hear Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham or Tucker Carlson. I listen to them and I'm horrified at the irresponsibility. Being able to broadcast, being able to have your voice heard, as we did on KGO, by millions of people every day, particularly in a time of crisis, you should be endowed with a special sense of responsibility. And I think that is what I miss more than anything else.
It was. And what you were doing and what everyone was doing on that station that I think is so greatly missed and has, I don't think, adequately been filled by social media, the service, is connecting the community in a time of crisis and allowing people to speak their fears and their concerns and their prayers into the ears of other people in the community. And that was such an important thing. I think the first big time, although I listened to radio from a very early age, and KGO in particular, the first time I really truly remember hearing it on a regular basis was during the earthquake in 1989, the Loma Prieta quake, and so many people were talking about what was happening and just putting their thoughts out in the community, and people were just like opening the phone lines and allowing that to flow, and people connected with that and heard that and formed a real community, which is very difficult to replicate online because you're mediating it in a different way. You don't hear people's actual voices, and I think that's important because it's a touch of humanity that doesn't get passed along when you're in social media in the same way. And for that reason, like what you did was so important. That was when Gene Burns was on in the afternoon, correct? Like he was on from
7 to 10.
7 to 10. Okay, he was already on in the evenings.
So what happened is that they had all the national broadcast till 7, and then I came on.
Yeah,
and I might tell you, as much as I enjoy doing this with you, and as much as I enjoy my own podcast, we now have about 30,000 people downloading our podcast.
Wonderful.
And in large measure, it was because of your helping and promotion, and I want to give you full credit. I miss the interaction.
Yeah.
People walk up to me who recognize me and say to me, "Didn't you used to be John Rothman?" If I could do one thing that would, I think, make a difference, it would be to have a talk radio program based on the model of KGO. We had liberals, conservatives, libertarians, progressives. We had every aspect of our society represented. And I think that is what made it a success. But you understand what we are, I don't want to say reduced to now, but I'm going to use the term reduced to now,
I know.
Is this kind of wonderful banter. And everybody should know, the reason I know Beowulf is because of our work together on KGO.
Because many years ago, in the last millennium, I had the privilege of call screening for you for a couple of nights overnight when you were on the 1 to 5 shift. You were the Ray Taliaferro of the weekends.
That is exactly what I called myself, the Ray Taliaferro of the weekend. I must tell your listeners a funny story. Mm-hmm. So I worked overnights for 11 years and 11 months, but who's counting? And I was in a restaurant standing in a line. My wife was with me, and I was talking to my wife as I would normally do. And all of a sudden, a woman turned around and said, "Excuse me, you're John Rothman." I said, "Yes." I am.
That was when you were still John Rothman.
Right. And she turned to my wife, and you know what she said? Remember, this is overnight.
Right.
I